Hi Kipsters, Miss S with your second grade read aloud. Hope you all are having a wonderful Tuesday, and I'm so excited to finish reading our text with you from yesterday, Bone, Button, Borscht. So for my friends that missed out yesterday and for my other friends, just to remind you of what happened, remember we have our main character in our text, the beggar, and he comes to this town hoping to find lots of people that will give him food and warmth and a place to stay, but instead the town that he comes to, everyone stays in their homes and they're very cold and they're not really allowing him to be in their houses and they're not giving him any food. So he decides to come up with this plan. He decides to take the buttons off his coat and he starts convincing people that he can make this special bone button borscht. So at this point in the text, he's able to convince many townspeople that he can make this special soup. He convinces the shamus, the tailor, and a few other neighbors that he can make this soup. So let's see if he's able to convince them and make the soup happen. By the time the shamus reached the synagogue, the whole town was with him. The people crammed themselves inside. The beggar looked up and cried, "Peace be with you." There was a long silence. Then someone called out, "So, Mr. Miracle Man, make us a miracle." "You want a miracle?" the beggar asked. "I'll give you a miracle." "Pot," he cried. They put the pot on the stove. "Water," they poured in the water. "Button," they gave him the button. Plunk, plunk, plunk. The beggar dropped in all the bone buttons. He picked up the wooden spoon and stirred. When the pot began to steam and bubble, he spooned out some water and took a sniff. "Not bad," he said, "but it could be better." "What could make it better?" asked the people. "A little sugar, a little salt, a little pepper. That could make it better," replied the beggar. So they bought him sugar and salt and pepper. He sprinkled them all into the pot and stirred. Then he took another sniff. "Not bad," he said, "but it could be better." "What could make it better?" asked the people. "Have you got any pickle juice?" "That could make it better," replied the beggar. So they brought him pickle juice and poured it into the pot. The beggar stirred and then stopped. He looked at the people. He looked at the pot. He looked at the people again. Then he shook his head. "You've got a problem, Mr. Beggar?" asked the shamus. The beggar frowned. "Wait," said the shamus. He ran to the cupboard and brought back a bulb of garlic. "Would this help, Mr. Beggar?" he asked. "Why not?" laughed the beggar. "Mr. Beggar, I've got some carrots," someone said. "And I've got beets," called another. "I've got onions. I've got beans. Would these help, Mr. Beggar?" they asked. "They wouldn't hurt," laughed the beggar. So the people ran off and returned with their arms full of vegetables. The beggar sliced them all. He diced, he chopped, he shredded. Then he dumped them into the bubbling pot and he stirred that borscht round and round. "Do you know what we have here?" asked the beggar. "We have a beautiful borscht. That's what we have. A very tasty borscht. Now some people say a little bit of cabbage really brings out the flavor. But I say keep it simple. Who needs cabbage for borscht?" At the back of the synagogue, a woman waved her arms. "Mr. Beggar, you want cabbage? I've got cabbage, Mr. Beggar." Before he could reply, the woman was gone. She returned with a sack full of cabbages and handed it to the beggar. He looked at the cabbages. He looked at the people. Then he shrugged his shoulders and began to chop. He chopped until every last cabbage had been added to the borscht. The people watched the steam rise from the pot. They listened to the bubbling borscht. They smelled the rich, sweet, and sour aroma as it filled the synagogue. Bellies rumbled, mouths watered, and everyone pressed in closer when the beggar finally ladled some borscht into a cup. It was deep red and thick with vegetables. He blew on it. He blessed it. Then he dipped in his spoon and he tasted it. Slurp, slurp, slurp. So, Mr. Beggar, how does it taste? The beggar smiled. Not bad. Who wants to try some? Everyone in the room rushed forward. They snatched cups. They grabbed bowls. Borscht, 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 they chanted. The beggar patiently ladled steaming hot borscht into every bowl and cup. Soon everyone was sipping and slurping borscht. Then the people raised their arms. They rolled their eyes toward heaven, and they cried out, "Delicious, perfectly delicious. This is the best borscht we've ever had. The little beggar did it. He made borscht out of buttons. It's a miracle." Then, like magic, bread appeared, and boiled potatoes, and roast chicken, and wine. The people ate, and they laughed. They laughed, and they ate. Then they brought out accordions and violins, and they sang and they danced for hour after delightful hour. And when this last slurp of borscht was slurped, and the last dance danced, and the last song sung, the shamus invited the beggar to spend the night at his house. The next night another family took him in, then another, and another. One day the beggar gathered the townsfolk together to say goodbye. "Please don't go," they begged. "I must," he said. "But your buttons, how can we make borscht without your magic bone buttons?" "And how can I fasten my coat without my buttons?" asked the beggar. "How can I keep warm without buttons?" So they traded with the beggar. They gave him brass buttons for bone buttons. And then the beggar left. They never saw him again. The years passed. One by one, the beggar's bone buttons were lost. But it's a strange thing, a wonder perhaps. The townsfolk learned that they didn't really need the buttons. They learned to make borscht without them, and they learned to help one another without borscht, even in hard times. That was the real miracle the beggar left behind. All right, Kipsters, make sure you guys are sticking around for part 2 of today's text study lesson. See you there.